we're moving on, or we're trying. And we do so with the help of our next guest, the esteemed colleague and columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, who was out there in Arizona with the Birds on that fateful Sunday, 9 days ago. Mike Sielski joins us here on Birds 365. Mike, thanks. Glad to see you made it back safe and sound. Knew you did. Heard you on the radio yesterday. Here's where I want to start with you. It was Frank Sinatra who said, regrets, I've had a few, but too few to mention. And you have to accept it because he's Frank. What are you going to do? Second guess Frank? But I'm not sure if that was
chairman of the board, Jody.
I understand I'm going down a slippery slope here, but
watch it, Jody. I got chunks of guys bigger than you in my school.
All right, yeah, I'm more afraid of old Blue Eyes than I am of Nick Sirianni. But if you went to the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles and you asked him about last Sunday, what regrets would he have? And we have to accept that they're more than too few to mention because they didn't win the damn game. So what would you say that Nick Sirianni would put on the top of his regret list?
Oh, I think there's a few things, Jody. I think number one, the Eagles organization and Sirianni as a whole would have hired a private investigator to make sure that the turf at State Farm Stadium was up to snuff, because the Eagles, took the high road when it came to the playing conditions, but I really think it hurt them a little bit more than it hurt the Chiefs, just because their defense was so predicated on pass pressure. And, it was like watching those guys play on banana peels all night because they were slipping and sliding so much. That's number one. I wonder if Nick has said every time he's been asked about it that he would punt on that 4th and 2 late in the game in the fourth quarter. But man, I wonder about that. And I wonder about it from
Mike. 4th and 3.
Yeah, 4th and 3. Yeah. I know, okay. But I wonder about it from a psychological standpoint. This was the thing. This was kind of the unspoken, or at least underappreciated aspect, I always thought, of what the Eagles did back in 2017 with Doug Peterson, and kind of being at the vanguard of going forward on 4th down as often as they did, is that it gives a team that does that a psychological edge on their opponents, because they become so accustomed to playing loose in those situations that it becomes easier over time for them to succeed in those situations. And that if a coach or the team takes a step back and pulls back in those situations, then it's a bit of a letdown. And, given the way that sequence played out, that they decided not to go forward on 4th and 3, that they have Siposs punt, that he hits a terrible punt, that Tony brings it back to the 4, that it leads to another Chiefs score, and the gap is widened there. I just wonder if Nick's looking at that saying, man, I know it's risky. I know if we don't get it, the Chiefs probably score anyway, but man, I would take that shot if I had it to do over again.
Really, it's interesting you bring that up, because at Nick's season-ending press conference, Mike, and Howie as well, I got to be honest, he gave that answer, and I was with him. And he mentioned Bob Lang, the Eagles PR guy, and he said, if Bob didn't bring it up to me and prepare it, I wouldn't even thought about it. 4th and 3 from his own 32. It wasn't. You're right about the 4th down. I brought that up before the game, and they did it in the first half. That puts incredible stress on the opposing defense. It becomes a math equation, right? You got 4 plays to get 10 yards. That's difficult for the defense to stop, but that's in plus territory. If that were at the 49, the Chiefs 49, even Doug Peterson in the Super Bowl, 4th and 1, Zach Ertz, 4th and 1, they could do the tush push. They did it in the NFC Championship game. All right. But 4th and 3? Because I had a lot of fans saying, well, they were going to score anyway. You can't coach that way.
That's 2020 hindsight after it's Shankopotamus. Anybody could say that.
Yeah. I know, guys, but I, to be very honest, and I'm not embellishing or anything, I was thinking in the moment, you got to go for it here. And I think part of it is the feeling of the context of the game, that the defense was having such a difficult time stopping Mahomes and Reed and that offense. You can't let them back on the field in any situation. And I get it. I understand why you guys are saying what you're saying, and 99 times out of 100, maybe I'd be with you. But given who the Eagles were, given who their opponent was in that situation, I really think I would have gone for it. And that's all I can say. I mean, I wonder. I'm sure Nick is saying, yeah, I did the right thing rationally, but I gotta think there's a part in his gut that's saying, oh man, what if I had called a play to let Jalen create and he got it, or we got Goddard for 3.5 yards, on a quick turnaround pass, something along those lines. I have to think that he's putting his head on the pillow at night and saying, boy, I wonder if we had gone for it, how things might have turned out.
No, I'm with John on this one. I believe, and I'm not saying that you're not right, Mike, but I believe the coach said what he said, that he didn't even think it was going to be a question. He was so strong in his belief, I got a punt here, that I don't think he's second guessing himself after the fact. I really don't, but maybe he should be, as you point out. But just judging by Sirianni and how he answered the question, I believe him. I don't think he really even gave it a second thought. Shoot, we got a punt here. Boom. Let's go on. All right, another Sirianni question for you. They've lost 2 coordinators now. Their offense coordinator, their defense coordinator, off to Indy, off to Arizona. They're in the process of hiring their replacements. Certainly Nick Sirianni is going to be consulted on it. Got some interesting information that John has pointed out a couple times. I was listening and I heard that. I go, wow, I didn't know that Sirianni was hired after both Gannon and Steichen, that they hired those 2 guys first and then they hired the head coach. John has been telling me for 2 years they're going to hire Gannon anyway. So and none of us knew that Steichen was hired first. So Howie Roseman and Jeff Lurie will have their hands all over these replacements on the coaching staff. Sirianni will certainly be part of the conversation, but he's not dictating it. Any chance that these hirings go awry, that there is some internal strife? Because they once fired a Super Bowl coach over the fact that they couldn't agree on his coaching staff and how it should be handled. Are we just waiting for the other shoe to drop here?
I think there's absolutely the possibility for strife here, Jody, for the very reason that you cited. And consider the personality differences between Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni. I mean, Doug Peterson, up until the moment he won that Super Bowl, was, kind of demure, stayed in the background. I wrote this infamous column,
the ficus plant. Yeah.
The potted ficus, where Doug is standing in the background, and that was true.
Oh, yeah, it was true.
And it was true right up until the moment that Tom Brady Hail Mary hit the ground. And then Doug started really to assert himself more because he had won the Super Bowl and he and Nick Foles had collaborated on the Philly special. And before you know it, he and the powers that be, the real powers that be in the Eagles, aren't seeing eye to eye, and they've got to part ways. And I had somebody within the organization tell me, it's going to be interesting if Nick ever gets to that point, because Nick has a far more assertive, natural personality than Doug Peterson does. I mean, these guys are all alphas. Every NFL head coach is an alpha male and is egotistical and believes in himself to the nth degree. But Nick flashes it more than most guys do, and in some ways, it makes him more normal than just about any other Eagles head coach I've ever covered. But in some ways, it makes him the kind of guy who, if Jeffrey and Howie push back and Nick feels like, what, I don't like this, or I'm the guy who got the Eagles to the Super Bowl, I don't have to take this, then yeah, I think the potential for conflict is there. Sure.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because number one, that was a great column. I loved it. I still cite it today, the ficus, and it was completely correct. And I was taken aback. I was used, as I'm sure you were, when you get to sort of draft season, it would be, Joe Douglas, Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson. And then it was Andy Weidel. And Doug would just sit off to the side, and we'd all be asking these questions of Howie and Andy, and Doug would be there playing with his water bottle. That was a famous moment as well. And then Nick showed up, and it was Andy and Howie, and Nick just took over the dais. He's like, boom, I'm going.
Yep.
And he took it over. And I was shocked. So there is a big difference. And
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just a personality thing
yeah,
too,
sure.
John. It just that's the way Nick is. And the other factor that we have to take into consideration here too is that I've been a believer in watching Nick on the sideline. Okay. There is this fine line with him where you want a coach to be authentic, right? And I think that's why and how he connects with his players is they know that with Nick, what they see is what they get. But there is some maturing, I think, that he has to do in terms of his demonstrativeness on the field, right? Remember the game in Indianapolis where he stands on the
yeah,
bench and
yeah.
gestures to the fans after the Eagles beat the team that fired his mentor, Frank Reich. And I think it would serve him well to kind of figure out when to use that and when not to use it. I think there's some maturing that he has to do as a relatively young coach. But once he gets to that point, then it's going to be interesting to see if he's still with the Eagles by then, how he negotiates this situation with Howie and Jeffrey and the power and who has it and who can use it and all of those kinds of things. Because right now he's just an assertive guy, and as you said, he is out there all the time and unafraid to be that way. And I wonder as he ages and matures more as a coach and as an operator in the NFL, as a lot of these guys have to be, most guys have to be, how does that change the way he interacts with the people that he works for?
All right, time for a Jody McDonald unfair question, and I ask these from time to time. Knowing full well that the answer will be predicated on who they choose to hire to replace the two coordinators that they've lost, but without knowing either of those two guys yet, who do you think is harder to replace, Steichen or Gannon, on the Eagles going forward?
That's a really good question, Jody. It's really unfair.
They're always good questions.
It's so unfair.
I just admit ahead of time that they're unfair. That you need more information to give a true answer to it, but that's the fun part of it.
I think the simple answer is it's hard. It'll be harder to replace Gannon because Nick is an offensive coach, right? Number one. And because you already have Brian Johnson on staff, who clearly has a connection with Hurts and deserves some credit, a good bit of credit for helping develop Jalen Hurts. And so therefore, in theory, it should be harder to replace Gannon because at least you have some kind of reserves, I guess you'd say, on staff already if you want to tap into them in Johnson and Nick. Having said that, if they make the right hire for the defensive coordinator and their new candidate and their new coordinator brings in a system that's a little bit different from Jonathan Gannon's, and it's a better system or it works better for the personnel or however you want to define it, then there's no telling why they can't hire a defensive coordinator who's an upgrade from Jonathan Gannon. And that's not necessarily a slight on Jonathan Gannon as a coach. I have some issues with how he went out the door the night of the Super Bowl, but in the ongoing debate over is he a terrific defensive coordinator or is he a guy who got carved up by good quarterbacks and therefore stinks, I lean a little bit more toward he's a pretty good defensive coordinator. So it's an impossible question to answer at this point, Jody, because we don't know who the replacements are going to be, and we don't even really know yet what they're looking for. I think, we have to see.
What is the standard with Jonathan Gannon? Because you mentioned the star quarterbacks, and a lot of that is common sense. I mean, Patrick Mahomes threw for 5,200 yards this year, so that tells me a lot of teams had trouble with Patrick Mahomes. In general, you have more trouble with good players than average players. That to me is common sense. And I look at it from the larger picture, Mike, and I say, well, 70 sacks, number 2 defense in the NFL, whomever the new defensive coordinator is, I don't like his odds to do better than that. I didn't like Jonathan Gannon's odds if he came back to get better than they were defensively this year. I certainly don't think a new guy is. How were people going to adjust to those two things? Say, if it's Sean Desai, if it's Denard Wilson, he's better than Jonathan Gannon, but the defense is ranked 10th. They have 45 sacks. How do those two things equate?
Well, here's what I think, John. I think the reason that people had such strong opinions about Gannon one way or another came down to a few different factors, but one of them was the stark difference between how poorly the defense did fare against those elite quarterbacks and how well it did against guys who weren't elite either ever or anymore. Okay. It was so different that if there had been one game that the Gannon defenders, and again, for the most part, I consider myself one of them, could have pointed to and said, you shut down Aaron Rodgers that one time, or you put up a comparable defensive performance in the Super Bowl to what the Bengals did in the AFC Championship game, that would have quelled some of that criticism. But the numbers in those games in 2021, when Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott and those quarterbacks played against the Eagles, were so incredible. And then the production that Gannon's defense got against the quarterbacks and teams who weren't that good was so terrific and so good in the aggregate that it became this almost like red and blue, like election night kind of thing between the two camps. And there's other factors that go into it. Are you looking at a defense in the aggregate? Are you looking at a defense in particular moments? Those two touchdown passes by Mahomes late in the Super Bowl, they count as much as any other, and they would have counted as much even if, an Eagles cornerback had been draped all over a Chiefs receiver and the Chiefs receiver had made a great catch. But the fact that those two receivers were so open, and again, and as he's admitted since then, got outsmarted by Andy Reid in those situations and Patrick Mahomes, it just added to the perception that he doesn't know what he's doing. So how will people square it? I think people will look at the results and they'll say, okay, well, Denard Wilson's defense had a better performance against the Cowboys and Dak Prescott than Jonathan Gannon's did. So that's one standard that we're going to measure him by. And the discussion will change. It just will. I mean, people move the goalposts in sports arguments all the time.
They do. Yes, they do.
All right, I'm going to move the goalposts a little bit here. I'm going to try to. And I think I heard you talking about this on Saturday with my other Mac partner. But if I remember what you said incorrectly, please correct me. The tush push. If they were to ban it, maybe, just maybe, you can get Jalen Hurts renegotiated for only $46 million a year instead of $50. You say, well, this was a big piece of why we were going to pay you, Jalen. So we got to pay you a little less. We didn't do this. The NFL did this. We're going to save a couple of dollars. The long-term implications could be advantageous for the Eagles, while the short-term implications, don't really work too well in their favor. What are your thoughts on the potential removal of the tush push in the National Football League going forward?
I don't understand. Look, more first downs is more excitement is what the NFL seems to want. And the justification that this is not aesthetically pleasing is just strikes me as ridiculous. There are a lot of plays in the NFL that aren't aesthetically
bubble
pleasing.
Screen. Ban it, Mike.
Yeah.
I don't want to see another bubble screen as long as I live.
I don't understand this, Jody. There's got to be, they're getting complaints from influential owners and coaches and general managers or something, because I don't understand the need to ban the push.
I kind of understand it. I'm in the opposite category. Here's how I look at it. So I'm going to throw this out to you, and Jody knows. I go all the way back to Billy Martin in the George Brett game. I always thought it was unfair that baseball, said, Billy Martin, we're going to penalize you because you're smarter than everybody else. He knew this loophole that nobody else knew, and he pulled it out of his back pocket exactly when he needed it. I thought it was brilliant. I thought he deserved credit. And then after the fact, then say, this is not what we meant. This is not the spirit of the rule. We're changing it moving forward. I have no problem that the NFL does. I think the Eagles did a phenomenal job with it. I think, they deserve credit for taking advantage of the rules at the time. And the NFL should go back and look at it and say, you know what? This is not what we envisioned. We don't want this rugby scrum. If three quarters of the league agrees, we're going to overturn it. Go all the way back to Reggie Bush against Notre Dame. Notre Dame should have won that game, but they didn't. Overturn the rule, but give the Eagles credit. That's where I am.
I mean, that's fair enough. I just, As a general matter in the NFL in particular, John, I am against over legislation.
Oh, I'm with you there.
Yeah, and I feel like you can drive yourself crazy, and I think the NFL is on its way to doing that with trying to correct or self-correct every imperfection in a sport. We saw this. Look, we saw this in the Super Bowl, right? And we've seen it now with the technical nature of instant replay. You can't convince me that the reason that the officials overturned the Miles Sanders fumble, okay, and I thought it was a fumble. He fumbled, he caught the screen pass, made a football move, got popped, and fumbled the ball. You can't tell me they didn't overturn that and rule it an incomplete pass because they said to themselves, Devontae Smith had control of the ball longer than Miles Sanders did. And we ruled that Devontae Smith's play was not a catch. So therefore, we cannot rule that this is a fumble because people will be questioning the credibility of our officials, not that they weren't already, for years to come. And I think this is all born out of trying to correct for every single thing. You see it in officiating calls with trying to protect quarterbacks, throwing flags time after time. It's creating a situation where the game becomes at times unwatchable and overregulated. And I think the tush push is just another example of that. Stop banning stuff. Let's stop banning stuff.
Well, along that line of thinking, how did Carl Shepard, the referee, not decide, I haven't thrown a flag for 58 minutes for pass interference, for defensive holding, but now with less than 2 minutes to go, you did see the shirt came out about this much. It did. And shoot, Bradbury admitted to it after the fact. But did he actually change the course of the wide receivers' movements? I just thought it was a soft call, and it was one that didn't need to be made. Why didn't Sheffers think along those lines of, hey, we've been doing something all day. We got to kind of stay the course here. We had Devontae Adams play earlier in the game, Devontae Smith, excuse me. Why didn't the NFL stay the course and call the game the same way throughout the 60 minutes with game to pass defense?
Well, I don't want to misspeak on this, Jody, but I think I read somewhere, and John or Jody, you guys can correct me on this. I read somewhere that Mahomes might have thrown that pass in the manner that he did to Juju Smith-Schuster because he had seen Bradbury grab Schuster's jersey, and he knew he'd get the call, or at least took the chance that he'd get the call. If that's the case, that's pretty smart by Patrick Mahomes. Is it a soft call? I guess it is. And if I get the whole athlete's perspective on this, that if the officials haven't been calling that infraction all game, you adjust the way you're playing and you don't expect it to be called later in the game. But technically it is a hold. But again, that gets down to what we're talking about here. Like, you can call anything a penalty if you are looking for, and officials have these cues where,
the
pass
jersey
interference.
comes out. The cue if the jersey comes out.
If the cornerback doesn't turn his head around to see the ball, then it
Yeah.
must be pass interference, even if it's not really pass interference. I don't know. We could go round and round about this. Technically, it's a hold. The jersey came out. Technically, it's a hold. Bradbury said it was a hold. You could go either way on this thing. I think what most people are upset about is the fact that, and by most people here, I include those people who had no rooting interest in the game and just wanted to see an exciting conclusion of the Super Bowl. I think most people are upset about the fact that with 1:40 to go and the Eagles likely down by 3, they would have had the ball with a chance to tie or win the game. And if you're an Eagles fan, you absolutely want that. You want your team to have a chance. And this call took that chance away.
Yeah. And to your point about Mahomes, it doesn't, I don't even listen to it would have not catchable football. You have no idea what's going to happen if there's not a hold, if that adjusts and Patrick makes the proper throw. So I didn't even listen to that part of it. But, and I go back to your talk about the field, Mike. I give the Eagles credit for one, as you mentioned, James Bradbury, saying, hey, it was a hold. I wish I got away with it, but it was a hold. Howie Roseman, both teams played on that field. I give the Eagles credit for that part of it. Do you think that's just lip service, though, or do you think they are really upset Obviously Howie's going to get fined. James is going to get fined if they criticize the officials. I'm one of those people, and Jody knows this. I don't complain about officiating. What do coaches always say, Mike? You've heard it a million times. Control what you can control. Yep. I can't control Carl Shepers. That was the call. That was the call. I got to move forward. I give the Eagles credit. Was it lip service, though, or are they really upset?
I think they're upset. I got Jeffrey Lurie by myself in that locker room after the game. And, I said, what did you think? And he said, I would have liked our team to have had a legitimate shot to win at the end, or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing what he said. I had the quote in my column. So, yeah, I think they're upset. I think they felt like Shepard should have kept the flag in his pocket, all of that. But, I think they feel like the field was not in great shape. And what's interesting is next year at the Vegas Super Bowl,
same field. Yeah.
The conditions are going to be exactly the same unless the NFL does something between now and then. So, I think they're angry and upset.
Peter King had his column this morning, Football Morning in America, had some good stuff with Jonathan Gannon. He also had a little piece about, which I did not see, Travis Kelce communicating the Kadarius Toney on the first of the two touchdowns that were very similar, saying when he went into jet motion, control yourself because of the field. Basically was saying, stay under control. They understood it was an ice rink as well. There's a perfect example of them understanding the situation. Travis Kelce communicating with his teammate, understand what you're doing. Got to handle those things, Mike.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely do. And the Chiefs handled them better than the Eagles did. And I think, too, you go back and review that game. I've said this before, guys. I come back to one play. I think it was in the third quarter. The Eagles are coming after Mahomes, and he scrambles to his left and then kind of darts back to his right and throws across his body, and the pass is like 3 inches off the ground. And Travis Kelce over the middle catches it for about an 8-yard gain. And in the grand scheme of things, you look at the box score, you say, that's a nothing play. But in that game, in that moment, that's the kind of play that is so demoralizing to an opposing team because you think you've got the quarterback corralled and you don't. And he makes a pass that doesn't look like it has a chance of being completed. And it is, because Mahomes is that great and Kelce is that great. And you say at some level, you have to tip your cap to the Chiefs and say those two guys and Andy Reid, that trifecta there, are so good at what they do that, we talked all week about if you stack the two rosters up against each other, the Eagles have the better of the overall talent and depth. But the Chiefs are a top-heavy team, and that top is really heavy. Yeah.
All right. Last thing, Mike, and I'm going to ask you to do your best reading between the lines here. And it's pretty important. Again, might be an unfair question. The Eagles starting center is going to have to make a decision here pretty soon. To play or not to play? That is the question. Will Jason Kelce be back with the Philadelphia Eagles? He said he needed to take some time and didn't want to make a decision in the moment after a tremendously difficult loss in the Super Bowl, even though it was a win for his brother. What do you think his timing looks like? We all assume he's going to do it before free agency starts, which means he's got a whole month. Next week, the week after, is he going to go all the way right up against free agency? He's going to tell the Eagles, listen, I still haven't made up my mind. I'm not going to a dark place like Aaron Rodgers, but I still need some time to think on this. When is Kelce going to let us know whether he's coming back for another season?
Well, he's going to someplace, Jody, because he's becoming a father again. So, I mean, that's a factor we have to take into consideration.
Is his wife
here.
Still not giving birth?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything, John.
I haven't heard.
I'm
sure we talked all week about she could give birth out in the brought the doctor out to Arizona. We're 10 days later now. What the heck?
Yeah. I know. We've become so accustomed to Jason sharing everything with us that we're surprised when he doesn't share something with us as big as having another baby. I think that's a factor here that probably, again, I have no firsthand knowledge of this, talking to Jason or anything like that. But I would think, just as a father of two, that when a baby comes along and you're adjusting to life as it is now, it's probably going to lead to him taking some more time and thinking it through. again, I have no idea. I have no idea. I'm speaking basically for myself, that if I were in Jason's shoes and my wife and I were having our third child, which we don't, we only have two, we would take as much, I would take as much time as I could take before I made a big life decision about my career. You know, and I wonder, you know, I think John was there after the game too. You know, after Jason finished at the kiosks and the podiums, he came back into the locker room and talked to a few of us after about another 10 or 15 minutes. And I came away from that thinking he really has a hard decision to make, because he did say, you know I'm not quite as good as I used to be. And I said to him, you know, I think a lot of people who watch the NFL and, you know, really pay close attention would be surprised to hear you say that. And he said, yeah, but I know where I'm not as good. So I don't know. I don't know. And I think anybody who knows is just speaking out of their, you know what.
But I do know that Jason will let the Eagles know so they can plan. Because it, you know, that's just the way he is. So he's not going to leave the Eagles hanging.
Right.
But nobody knows the decision. You're right about that. At Mike Sielski, Inquirer.com. By the way, you found some Eagles fans that were, because I don't get these people, Mike, your recent column. Yeah, it stinks, one, that we lost to the Chiefs, but they're really good. At least I got to see my team win one. Boy, you found some logical, sound fans. I'm impressed.
You know what, John? It was just kind of something I picked up on over the last couple of weeks and really throughout the whole season. I just didn't feel the desperation amongst the fan base going into that Super Bowl that I felt going into Minneapolis. And the residue of that victory over the Patriots in Super Bowl 52, I think, is still here. The two examples I'll use, you know, number one, I think everybody remembers the way Ray Dittinger reacted on NBC Sports Philadelphia and the scene of his son David coming up and giving him a hug on the set and all of that. And Ray loves the Eagles. He does. And I think that moment spoke to a lot of people, and the fact that it had been since 1960 that the Eagles had won a championship. And there was a feeling amongst a lot of people that, hey, I haven't seen them win. My dad hasn't seen them win. My grandfather hasn't seen them win. And now they have. And that's amazing. And I speak for myself in this regard. Like, I got to share an Eagles Super Bowl victory with my father, who's been a fan his entire life and was 12 years old in 1960, and who was thinking, I might never see them win a Super Bowl. And I've had friends and family members who have passed on who didn't get to see them win a Super Bowl. And when that happened back in 2018, it meant a lot to him. And so the feeling now that we could have won another one, but we didn't. But man, the ride was great. And yeah, remember 2018? That was pretty awesome. I think was still there for a lot of people.
You do run in different circles than me, because all I hear about is we were robbed. They put Mahomes over. He's the franchise. He's the face of the NFL. Yeah, I guess we're talking to different people. But
I get more angry people, Mike. I get
well, you know, maybe we're talking to two different segments of the fan base here.
Yeah.
We appreciate you're talking to us. Thanks for hopping on with us, Mike. You know, we're going to talk to you plenty during the offseason. Appreciate you're getting up early with us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Sielski from the Philadelphia Inquirer and Weekends on WIP with Glenn Macnow. All right. He's another Mac, that Macnow guy.